Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Lights podcast. I know it's been a little while since the last one, and I'm sorry about that, but we're back now. And for this episode, we have something a little different than all the ones before, and something a little more fun, I think. In this case, I had the pleasure of talking to an old friend of mine, Ruby Josif, who has, over the last 3 to 4 years, found herself in the position of being a sex coach, though these are things that she has been thinking about for a lot longer than that, as you'll hear her discuss. This was a fun and excellent conversation on a topic that is relevant to all of us, and I think we can all learn from what she has to say in this case. We both share our opinions, and though things maybe get a little bit silly at times, they're often very sincere, and I think there's a lot to learn there. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you do, let me know in some manner, and I now give you Ruby Josif. Okay, we'll just roll from here. Ruby, thank you for joining me.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this chat.
Yeah, no, me too. I guess quick bit of background context for anyone listening. Ruby and I are friends. We've been friends for quite a while now, 10 or 12 years, something along those lines, though we haven't seen each other
Mm.
for a hot minute, unfortunately. But I have been keeping up with what you've been doing, which we're here to talk about today. So, Ruby, what is a sex coach exactly, and what made that your calling?
I kind of firstly want to circle back to how we know each other. I feel like you were just
Okay.
so mysterious then. I was thinking about
All
this all
right.
day because I knew you were gonna, I knew you were going to dive straight into like, what is it that you do? But I feel like we need to like touch on the fact that you have known me and I have known you since we were like total nerds in high school.
Hmm. Yep.
And I think that's why I was actually feeling a little bit nervous coming on here and like talking about what I do for work and stuff because I was like, oh wow, this is the first time I've ever had a done a podcast with someone who's known me through all of the different iterations and seasons of my life. So yeah, it's such a
Yeah,
pleasure to be on here today. But
it's a little bit familiar, isn't it? It's kind of that thing when you do anything, I think, that's a little bit different and involves like a public facing presence. I think it feels strange, like the fear of judgment maybe from your friends, that because it's a different version of yourself that you're showing to everyone, and
100
the yeah. So
Yeah, 100%. It's like you've known me since high school party girl days and now coming in as a sex coach. And yeah, like I'll dive into what that is.
supposedly
But
mature
yeah,
adults.
it's been supposedly mature adults, right? But essentially what a sex coach is, so I work with primarily with women and I specialize in female sexuality. And my approach, there's lots of different approaches, but I take a really holistic approach, right? So I incorporate the mind, the body, the energetic side of things, the spiritual side of things, and essentially support women to create a really nourishing and sustainable sex life and to build a really beautiful relationship with their body, to build a really beautiful relationship with intimacy, connection, and sex so they can create a life and not just a life, but relationships, even how they work, essentially all areas that they show up in their life. Our sex life really does translate through, and lots of the themes that we navigate in our sex life translate into our wider life. So while sex coaching does have a focus and emphasis on sex and connection and pleasure and intimacy, a lot of the things that we cover really do translate in so many other areas too. But essentially, what I help women do is to feel more present in their body, to experience more pleasure, to experience more connection, and to feel more confident in who they are as women and as sexual beings.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's cool. That what you said there at the end about it translating into other parts of life. I think I wanted to maybe circle back on that later. But for now, what motivated you to go down that path, do you think?
Yeah, this is this is a question I get quite often because it is such obviously an unusual route
Mm,
to go down. I think this is why I was feeling a little bit nervous for this interview, is because you have known me for so long, and it's so interesting. Um,
mm,
I guess referring to this younger version of myself that you actually knew quite well and
hmm
saw in action. Um, so yeah, I guess like my whole life I've been incredibly sexually curious. I've been quite a sexually open person, and have always felt really drawn to taboo things, to the darker, like, undercurrents of the world. I've always been really
hmm
interested in sex and relationships. As I kind of left Darwin, as I left our hometown, I kind of left in a way that was a little bit challenging. I sort of bolted after a bit of a nasty breakup and a relationship that was quite repressing or repressive. And I started this kind of reconnecting to this part of me that always felt so curious and open to sexuality and sex and
mm,
pleasure and the taboo. And after leaving Darwin, I kind of started to really um, connect with a part of myself I guess I started that journey of sexual liberation myself. I started learning all about sex and discovering that there's this whole world of intimacy and connection and pleasure and orgasmicness that is available to us as people. And as I started to kind of really explore this path and witness how it positively impacted my life, how it transformed relationships, how confident I was feeling, and how naturally I sort of took to this world, how it felt like home to me. It was like, oh, this is the world I feel really comfortable in, is the
mm,
world where we're talking the deeper, darker, more vulnerable, more I guess, erotic world that is sort of there. And when I started to really explore that and be in that world, it felt quite natural for me to then, find, I guess, a career in that world. And
mm,
it's sort of progressed quite naturally. I didn't even know that you could be a sexologist or that you could be a sex coach. I didn't know that when I was going through school. And when that sort of came up as an option, it just felt like the natural next step for me. So for the
mm,
past, gosh, like it'll be 8 years now, I've been kind of exploring and studying and now working in the field.
mm.
And I love it. And I don't actually know what else I would do. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, look, if you found something that really motivates you and you think is important and passionate for, that's that's more than most of us can say, I think, or at least at this early stage in our lives. It sounds like it was quite easy for you to get into this space and maybe to fall into it, and all that it involves. And I'm curious as to how easily you've found it for other people to fall into this space or to participate in it, and or to engage with you or to converse and think in the ways that you are when you're doing this. Because I know that the idea of sex coaching can be looked upon maybe with a little bit of cynicism, particularly by men, probably. Not because they
Mhm.
can't be better at sex. I don't think that's necessarily the point. I'm sure some of them believe that, but maybe it's more to do with I guess, the spiritual element that you sort of, and the intensity and the narrative, the whole narrative around the notion of sex, all these bits and parts and everything that there's an intensity there that maybe can make some people uncomfortable. So, and yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, has it been easy for you to find people to engage with you on this space and on that level, men or women?
Yeah. So, in a professional sense, I think the world of sex and intimacy and people's openness to the depth available in sex, in relationships, in intimacy, and consciously relating. I think people's like perception of that is starting to open, and we are seeing so much more interest in this area. I think for so long, sex has been such a taboo subject, and it's something that so many of us have never received adequate, education, even surrounding like just the basics, the absolute basics, that being our anatomy, the anatomy of our bodies. I can't tell you how many women I've worked with who don't know the correct terminology for their anatomy on their own body, right? So, sex and sexuality has for a very long time been something that people haven't spoken about openly. And I really do see that as starting to open up a lot. And there's a lot more curiosity and a lot more normalization surrounding conversations around sex and pleasure, particularly amongst women. So on a professional level, I've found, I speak to so many women every day who are navigating really similar challenges, and who are at points in their life where to go forward and continue experiencing sex and relationships and connections in the way that they are, it's just not fulfilling them anymore. And perhaps 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, people would have just pushed through and persevered and gone, oh, that's normal. Oh, that's just the way it is. Whereas there's a conversation that has really started around what is actually available to us. And I'll just say to us as women, because I primarily work with women, but to men as well, to people of all genders, right? There is this, you described it as an intensity, right? I would describe it as a depth. There is like a depth and breadth of experience and sensation and connection that is available to all of us. And it really comes down to our openness and willingness to actually explore what that means for us, how we want that to translate into our lives. Because I think for so many people, that is a real desire that they have to experience deep, connection, to experience, like extraordinary pleasure. And for some people, it's not a priority. So speaking to like the intensity that you're referring to, I sort of see that as like depth and breadth of pleasure and connection and experiences and I guess sensation that we have available to us. And what's really important to note here is that for some people, experiencing that in our lifetime is really important for them and is something that they really desire. And for some people, it's actually just not a priority, and it's not something that they're super interested in. And I guess what I really want to highlight in this conversation is that there's no one rule for every person. Like there's no one size that fits all. Like people's experience and desires surrounding sex and their sexuality and what they want their sex life to look like are going to be vastly different for everyone. So there's no right or wrong way. But I guess what I'm really noticing is that, yeah, these conversations are really opening up and showing people what's available to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that there is more of a demand, let's say, for or a need or a feeling for all the things you've just talked about in women, or there's an equal amount in women and men, or mostly in women, or are men just shyer or less in tune with their feelings, as it's sometimes put, or it's just a different landscape when it comes to intimacy, sex, and connection? Like, what would be your thoughts there?
Yeah. So in terms of the differences between men and women, and I guess their needs in when it comes to this work, I think that's the big piece, right? Is I think women and men come up against sometimes similar challenges, but also oftentimes quite different challenges. Like I said, primarily work with women, so I can't attest to the needs of men. However, I do relate with men, and I think I think everyone in this world could use a little, I think everyone can use a little bit of
Bit of sex
deepening in
coaching,
their understanding of, yeah, everyone could use a little bit of sex coaching, I reckon.
probably.
But at the very least, like, um, you know, a curiosity towards how they're having sex, what their desires are, where they perhaps have some work and some exploration and some deepening of their understanding of not just, how sex is for them, but for their partners. I think everyone equally has
Mm,
pieces that they can work on. And it's the same with, like, I'm sure pretty much everyone could go to, conventional therapy and have things come up that they could perhaps work on and deepen in and integrate. And I think sex is
mhm,
no different. I think when we look at, particularly when I look at, where we grew up in Australia, we didn't grow up in a society where we were, initiated into our sexuality in a way that was, for many people free of shame or free of judgment, or we sort of missed out on, um, I guess, being liberated within our sexuality from a young age. And I think it is quite rare to find people who are totally liberated in their sexuality, no matter their gender. So I think everyone has
mm,
a little bit of exploration that they could do in this
mhm,
regard.
mhm.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just for whatever reason, women tend to find themselves gravitating and towards this space more so, in terms of exploring it and perhaps exploring themselves. Perhaps because I, I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why that would be the case for women more than men, which maybe we don't need to try and get into now because that would probably be a long conversation. And perhaps there is just something more to women's sexuality than there is men's, but maybe there's not as well. Maybe that's a myth, um, and
Mm.
then maybe that's another conversation. But okay, well, maybe why don't we veer into the specifics of some of your work? Maybe there's some things you could teach us, some little free lessons you could provide, perhaps. What is it, do you think, either men or women or both together, what is it that we're usually doing wrong when it comes to sex? Or in contrast, what are we doing right most of the time?
Yeah. I'll start with what we're usually doing wrong. I'll
Okay.
start there. It's such a great question. I think one of the biggest things that I see people, and I don't necessarily like using the terms like right or wrong, but it's more like,
Mm,
what are the places where we really need to improve? And I would say, like, the biggest place that people need to improve on is their communication. And
mm,
our communication and our ability to communicate in a vulnerable, authentic, honest way when it comes to sex and when it comes to relating. I think for so many people, there is such blockages and challenge for a variety of different reasons. Oftentimes, fear of how our truth and what is real for us will be received. There's that fear there. There's also, a fear of being vulnerable and being hurt or not being seen or not being heard. Um, and so, what this manifests as is people just not communicating altogether, or communicating in a vague way, or expecting their lovers or partners to read their minds. And what happens here when we don't communicate and we have this expectation of people should just know what we need, people should just know that I don't like that, people should just know that they should be able to pick up on this or pick up on that,
mm,
where I think something that a lot of people are really crap at is actually saying it how it is and actually honoring what is true for them and being forward and clear and sometimes direct when needed as well. Um, and I also think, in saying that, I think there is a lack of skill surrounding communication. So people will try and communicate, but there's like a
mm,
lack of artfulness and there's a lack of creativity and there's a lack of integration with their communication. So rather than communicating from a place of hey, like, here's my desires, here's my heart, this is what I'm needing, it can often come from a place of like criticism, resentfulness, judgment. The way I describe it is we can communicate in a really open way, and we can also communicate in a really closed way. So I think
Mm,
that is one of the big pieces that I think everyone can always work on, and something I'm still working on. I think it's communicating is something we will continually develop as a skill, and it is essential in our sexual experiences and relationships. It is communication is a pillar for us to be able to build safety, for us to be able to express our needs, our desires, our boundaries. It's
mm,
a it's the pillar for us to be able to really create experiences and sexual experiences that deeply nourish us. It's the like the bridge between what's in here and what's in here and what's in our bodies, and actually bringing that forward so another person can see it and feel it and respond and take it on.
yeah. Yeah, the communication one certainly, okay, and communication comes in many forms, right, as well.
It does.
Verbally, through body language, through gestures, signals, all kinds of things. And like this, the spoken word in the bedroom is can be a bit of an interesting one in that, particularly perhaps in maybe in a casual setting where you're less familiar, it with someone, it almost feels like like a break in the process, in the momentum, right?
Yeah.
Like to just to stop and just almost and then to like to make a statement about
Mhm.
something. It feels a little strange, I think. It can be for some people a little bit abrupt, a little bit awkward. Um, so
Mm.
how would you go about suggesting we best communicate with each other?
Yeah.
Perhaps beginning in a casual circumstance, say like in a something that's very just short, a single, like an affair type thing, like just a one night stand when we don't have the
Casual
time and the
hookup.
context and yeah, and the don't know why I said affair then instead of just a hookup, bloody. I'm not sure
Fair. How naughty,
what
how scandalous.
what decade we're in our lives. But yeah, I think you get what I mean. In those sort of briefer contexts where you don't have perhaps the room so much outside of the bedroom to communicate as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think when we're in casual experiences, hopefully there is a conversation that is occurring before the casual experience takes place, if it's with someone new in particular, because there are some really important things that lay the foundations for great casual sex. And this really comes down to like building, how can we create a container of safety and trust with someone that we don't know super well? And that again comes down to communication.
Mm,
My suggestion here is weaving throughout, likely there's going to be some sort of interaction with the casual hookup. Say you have a meal together or you're, in a cab ride home together. In that conversation, there's a beautiful tool that we can use. It's the RBDSM communication technique. R
mhm,
stands for relationships, B stands for boundaries, D stands for desires, S stands for sexual health, and M stands for meaning. So this is a framework that we can use and adapt in conversation with new lovers. So we can very
mm.
gracefully say, oh, if we're wanting to touch on
Tick off the list on the cab ride home.
yeah, we can gracefully move our way through this and artfully weave things in. But, I think this is a great way for us to really ease anything that is on our mind so we can get out of our head and into our body, even in a casual experience. We have the opportunity to express our boundaries. We have the opportunity to discuss some desires, because casual sex is a great I see it as like an amazing training ground for us to really play and for us to like really explore different archetypes within ourselves and different versions of ourselves, and to really explore our desires. So this framework allows us to kind of almost go through a little checklist and, gracefully weave into our conversations. Oh, do you have any desires you would like to explore together tonight? Is there anything that you're really wanting? Is there anything that's a
Mm,
no for you. Oh, that's a no-go for you. These are my things that are a no-go for me. Um, oh, and while we're on that, sexual health. When was the last time you got tested? Is there anything I need to know about your sexual health? Here's the last time I got
Mm.
tested. Are we using a condom? Being able to just kind of like go through this framework, relationship. What's your relationship status? Are you poly? Are you monogamous? Are you seeing anyone else? Is anyone going to be impacted by our kind of interaction? And that's not me saying that you need to like sit there like an interview with your little like checklist and like go through it. Like we can gracefully weave these questions into an evening with a person. And by the end of the night, you're actually feeling more connected, more safe, and really sure and clear surrounding the nature of the container that you're going to enter into with this person. You can get out of your head and you can get into your body because they got tested last week and their results came back all clear.
Mm.
That they don't have a wife and 14 children and like a whole world waiting for them at home, right? Like it's just a way for us to, yeah, really kind of nut out some of those things. In terms of the checking in during sex in a casual relationship or a casual situation, this is the uncomfortable thing about sex. Sex is awkward at times. Sex is
Mm.
going to be, there are going to be moments in sex that aren't the perfect, fluid, oh my God, everyone knows exactly what they're doing. And like, especially with new partners, there's going to be
Mm.
moments where there is awkwardness and there is stumbles. And I think the more that we can embrace that the nature of sex as being an imperfect thing, the more relaxed we become around like both giving and receiving feedback and being able to move forward and kind of take it in our stride, right?
Mm.
Like we don't want to be in experiences where we're pushing through pain, discomfort, pretending, faking, acting as if we like something when we actually really don't.
Mm.
So as to not, disturb or like create awkwardness, right? It's like I would
Mm.
personally much rather have a moment of awkwardness that lasts 30 seconds than half an hour of crap sex. But
Mm.
that's just um, so I think the more we can embrace these, little moments of rupture in our sexual experiences, the better sex we're ultimately going to have as well. And I think that's the something that we've, really been we aren't shown in movies, in television, in pornography. We're not shown the awkward moments. We're not shown the little check-in-y moments where people are like, "Hey, are you enjoying that?" Actually, no, I'm not. Can you try this instead?
Mhm.
All of these things, yeah, I think all of these things, when we start to embrace um, the fact that sex doesn't have to be perfect, the more fun we have and the
Mm.
better sex becomes. Mm.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds so. It sounds a lot like your advice. Well, it comes back to communication again, which is what I guess what we've been talking about most of the time up to this point, and that prior to and during sex, being very upfront or open about what's going to happen, basically, or what you want to have happen is the key there to have perhaps solving some of the friction, of the awkwardness, of the lack of the night to be as full as it can be in
Yeah.
that way. And I can see people being, or part of that then comes down almost, it's at that point it's just like how good are you at conversation, right? Like in general, how good are you at just talking to someone
Yeah.
and not even just to flirt with them, but just to simply be vulnerable
Yeah.
and open. And I can see with what you were talking about there with in films, TV, you don't see those awkward moments of is this okay or like do I yeah something along those lines. You don't necessarily see what you were just talking about either. Like say the optimally subtle and at staged inquiry of those five things that you were just talking about from both
Yeah.
parties or just one party.
Yeah.
Um, um, but perhaps, as you were saying, like on the cab ride home, something that's just open and upfront, because
Mm.
potentially, do you think that maybe that introduces like, or perhaps almost emphasizes the transactional element of it by making it spoken and explicit in that way, and that is something that people, even if it benefits them, we're just talking about a casual context here. These are the
Mm.
things you'd work out probably more naturally and fluidly over maybe perhaps a longer period of time with a partner that you were
Mm.
considering being more serious with, or that might be done all at once at the beginning. Um, that can almost reduce that element of romantic magic, that flair, like everything's just gonna work and be okay and be fun and perfect, without me having to say like what sex position do you prefer, kind of thing, like do you need anything to orgasm, anything different in particular, or something like that, I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably a bit more explicit than maybe what you were saying for the cab ride home, but I guess, yeah, it's along the same lines.
I think this like really plays into like our fantasy of, what sex, or our idea and the narrative that we each all hold of what sex should be. And
Mm,
like, does a conversation like that play into it being more of a transactional situation? Well, I think a conversation like that allows us to get to the bottom of, is this a transactional situation? Like weaving in these kind of elements, it's not to um, it's not to kind of like check it off a checklist. It's really to create the foundation of safety, of trust, of transparency between the people coming together
mm,
um, in their connection, right? In intimacy, in sex, in whatever is going to be. And I think the idea isn't to make it sort of seem more transactional. It's actually to support people to fucking relax. Like, you
yeah.
touch the sexual health point. It's like, is there anything I need to know about you right now? It's like, oh, actually, yeah, like I I don't know, I got my period 2 days ago and I'm off limits for penetration, or like I'm on my period right now and how do you feel about that? Rather than it getting all the way to the point where you're making out in bed and then they're like, oh my God, I have to tell you something, you know? And
Yeah.
then it's like, what? What do you mean? Like what? And then that's when I think there's that real kind of stunting of an experience. Maybe stunting is the wrong word, but like interruption of an experience. So being able to have these conversations, I think, really actually creates the container for that magic and fluidity to kind of happen, because we're not sitting there in our head going, oh fuck, does he or she like what I'm doing? Like I'm touching them really
Mm,
firm. Maybe they don't like to be touched firmly, or maybe they like it soft. Do they like what I'm doing? It's like you actually have really clear parameters to play within.
mm,
And there's a lot more fluidity that comes from having these parameters already set up, from knowing each other's desires, from knowing each other's boundaries. And there's a lot of space and room for things to then blossom and bloom, right? And
mm,
there's also this level of presence and connection and trust between you two, which for women allows our bodies to relax and to open, for us to be able to experience deeper turn on and arousal, and from that we can experience more pleasure and orgasm. It really sets us up for a potentially really positive sexual experience where there's no kind of guessing. And naturally, the more it's not like a one and done conversation, right? Like I think whenever we're connecting sexually with people, there's there's always going to be a deepening that continues to happen. The more we get to know each other, each other's bodies, how we move, how we breathe, what we
mm,
like, what we don't like. It's an evolution that I think has magic to it. And I think that is still that will still inevitably unfold. However, these, I guess, tools allow it to almost unfold quicker because you're not fucking around the first time doing all the wrong things. You're like, oh, okay, great.
mm.
Like soft touch. She likes to be called a good girl and she doesn't like her hair pulled. cool, I won't do those things and I will do those things and we'll see how this goes, right?
Hmm.
And let it unfold. And if people are receiving what actually really turns them on, they open, and they
Mm.
open. And from there, when people start to open and their system and their sexual system starts to open, that's when that magic you're talking about, I think,
Mm.
really unfolds.
Comes
Yeah.
fun.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And part of, I think, what you're getting at, and is very integral to the whole story there, is how comfortable you are, or whether or not you're feeling, whether or not you're self-conscious, feeling
Mm,
self-conscious in that
yeah.
moment in particular.
Mm,
And I'd be
yeah.
curious to know your thoughts, or from what you've observed or learnt, and whether you think that affects men or women more in the bedroom, self-consciousness, and on
Yeah.
what level, if so, and what perhaps we can do in that moment, in those moments, to try and alleviate our self-consciousness, if possible, in such a short time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So yes, self-consciousness can play a huge part in um, usually keeping us in our head and lacking presence in the experience because we're just like, rather than feeling the sensations of the other person touching our
Mm.
body, the whole time in our head, we're going, oh my God, they think that my toes look weird. Oh my God, they're looking at my feet. Oh my God, I think my toes look weird. Oh my God, I can't deal with this. And I'm kissing them, but I'm not actually here and enjoying myself. So usually
Yeah.
something along those lines, is playing out if you're feeling self-conscious and you're not actually able to enjoy the experience. There's a couple of things here. The first one is the more that you can accept and love yourself in your entirety, which is no easy feat, right? But the more that you can accept and enjoy and love yourself, the less you give a shit about what other people think of you
Hmm.
and the less self-conscious you're going to be. However, that's not helpful when you know, I'm really trying to love myself, but fuck, I feel self-conscious about, I don't know, the way my pussy looks or the size of my feet or whatever it may be. And when we're having those kind of like intrusive self-conscious thoughts coming up when we're in, a sexual experience,
Mm.
oftentimes, and this again is super vulnerable because people don't like to come across as being imperfect. People don't like to come across or draw attention to things in themselves that they're feeling self-conscious about. But one of the most powerful things that we can actually do is to name what we're feeling.
Mm.
And again, this can feel super vulnerable, especially if it's with someone that you don't know very well. But what I personally do if I'm feeling self-conscious about something, I'll say, hey, this feels really vulnerable to share, but I'm feeling really self-conscious about I don't know, scabs on my knees or I don't know, whatever it may be, the size of my feet or whatever. Like I'm feeling self-conscious about X, Y, Z, you
Mm.
know. And one of the things that I really want to highlight here is that our perception of ourselves, we are so much more critical and finicky and like notice all of the little parts of ourselves way more than a person who is like who you're about to have sex with. Most of the time,
Mm.
people are just, fuck, this is great. Damn, they're so fucking hot. I'm so stoked to be here. I'm just happy to be here. And you're not thinking about the size of your toes or the way your hair is standing on end, or they don't care that you're not wearing makeup or whatever the self-consciousness may be. And
Mm.
that's a really beautiful way for you to just like just to like translate what's going on in your head and be like, hey, I'm feeling self-conscious about this thing. And 9 times out of 10, or I've actually never, I don't know, in my experience, people will then be able to offer you a little bit of reassurance and support.
Hmm.
It's okay to need that. My
Hmm.
other thing as well that I wanted to say was something we can do and I think if everyone did this more, it would just make everyone's experiences a lot better. But that's to like compliment your lovers.
Mm.
Like tell them and don't throw out like some superficial compliment that you don't mean. Like really take in your lovers, whether they're casual or whether they're someone you've been with for a long time or somewhere in between or whatever. But take them in and really take a moment to like appreciate the person that is in front of
Mm.
you and take a moment to see them and to actually go, hey, like I think you've got the most beautiful freckles or laugh or your pussy's gorgeous or you've got a gorgeous looking cock, like whatever that is, whatever that thing
Mm.
is, like really take a moment to see the person in front of you and actually compliment
Feel the
them.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and to, perhaps like just share with them how much you appreciate them and see them, you
Mm.
know,
Mm.
which is a great way for people to feel more comfortable. I speak to so many women who have deep insecurities about the way their pussy looks and about the way their vulva looks. And usually because some guy, when they were in their teenage years, said something really awful or started a rumor about them or made some really unsolicited comment about the size or shape or color or texture of their vulva. And women then hold this for, you know, for years, for their whole life sometimes. And a really beautiful thing that we can start to do is like, to compliment each other, to really yeah, to really see each other. Anyway, I'm going on about that, but I think
Hmm.
you catch my
Yeah.
drift.
No, I get what you mean. That was a good answer for sure. So something that I'm not sure whether what you think about this, if you think that this is the case, but it feels like, or it seems like, and I wonder if this has been more and more emphasized in this sort of age of pornography and quick instant gratification and quick fixes, that sex and just sex in general, maybe, but maybe casual sex more, probably casual sex more. The emphasis is very much on the orgasm rather than the
Mm,
process of the
mm,
sex itself, and perhaps that being the point, the
mm.
journey, not the destination in that way. Do you think that's true? And if it is true, how do we make it the point more about the process rather than the destination?
I love that. Yeah, so I refer to this as like goal-oriented sex. So people having like orgasm or goal-oriented sex, where the
Hmm.
whole point of the experience is that you come and then I come, or that someone comes. In many kind of heterosexual situations, this is usually punctuated by when the man comes, the experience is over.
Hmm.
The whole focus is on I need to make him come. Once he's come, that will mean the experience is done. Um, and that's just a generalization, of course, but that is a very
Hmm.
kind of common, I guess, narrative or situation that plays out. The way I teach sex and the way that I suggest for people to navigate sex and their sexual experiences is to take any kind of goal out of it, particularly for people who struggle to orgasm and who find orgasm really challenging, or people who experience a lot of pressure or put a lot of pressure on themselves in an experience to orgasm. And I think this also ties into, for men, like the pressure to be hard all the time, to be like showing up with a rock solid cock the whole time. And like realistically, like for, for some men, that's just not possible. And to the idea that sex doesn't have to be this like moving from A to B to C to D to orgasm or to coming or whatever. It's like you said, it's really opening up to the process and the ebbs and flows
Mm.
and what is available to us on the in between. And what happens when we take the pressure and the goal of orgasm out of sex is people feel a lot less pressure on themselves. When people feel less pressure, people, again, it comes back to that piece I was talking about, people's systems open. We feel more
Mm.
relaxed, feel more present in our body. We're not grinding on the story of like, oh my God, I need to come, I need to come, he needs to come. If we don't come, then it's not good sex. It's like, it
Mm.
really changes the whole intention of like, the intention behind this isn't just to come, it's actually to experience each other, it's actually to play, it's actually to explore one another's turn on, it's to explore one another's body, it's to experience deeper pleasure. And what I suggest to people is, rather than focusing on orgasm, what if you just focused on pleasure? What if you just focused on both giving and receiving as
Hmm.
much pleasure as possible in an experience? And the beautiful thing with that is usually what happens is when people focus on pleasure, orgasm naturally follows, and the orgasms that do follow are deeper, richer, more expansive, and more intense than when they're being forced out of a person.
Mm, mm. How, what would you say then would be the way to approach a situation if one person does orgasm and the other doesn't? Like in that, is there, and that kind of, it feels a bit awkward, right? Like it can be, it can feel as if it can be the case that it's someone's got one thing while the other person didn't, particularly in a casual scenario.
Yeah.
What would be the way to navigate that in your mind?
Yeah, for sure. So in that situation, I'd be rolling over to the other person and being like, what are you needing right now? What do you want? What
Mm,
what can I do right now? How can we move forward? What would you like to do? And seeing how you can kind of come together and keep creating an experience. Like I think creativity and curiosity in sex is so important, and not kind of I guess like we don't have to buy into all of the stories and narratives that we've been shown and told of like, oh, coming equals the end of an experience. Another big
mm,
one that I hear all the time is like, when a man's like loses his erection and it's like, oh, well, that just has to be the end of it. And it's like, well, what if we changed our view of sex? And it's like, what if the man doesn't have to be hard all the time? What if we allowed that to just be a fluid thing that kind of happens when it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. It kind of just moves, and that's where creativity is really important. Sex isn't just penetration. It's not just, there's so much that we can incorporate. And I think my invitation here is like to get curious about what your narrative of sex is, and where can you perhaps start to expand your view of sex. And if we're navigating that feeling of like obligation, one person's come, the other person hasn't, it's like navigating that feeling of obligation to have sex. Oh damn, I've lost my boner, I'm not going to be able to have like that kind of sex. It's like, okay,
mm,
well, what is available to us right now? What are you needing? What am I needing? Where can we come together and continue to co-create this experience if it feels good, right?
mhm,
But again, it comes back to communication and your abilities to be open.
mhm, mhm.
Mm.
So you're a sex coach primarily for women, Ruby.
Yeah.
So for all of us men out there, what can we be doing, in your opinion, or at least most of us, some of us,
Mm.
to be having better sex from the perspective of the woman, for the sake of the woman?
Mm. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first one is giving women your deep presence, like being deeply present with them.
Mm,
Something that um, I know many women crave is just when we're actually with a man in a sexual setting, it's like, I want to feel like you're right here with me. I don't want to feel like you're kind of off in another world, or like, thinking about what else has to be done. It's like that deep presence. And how can you provide that deep presence? And through presence, we feel safe. How can you
mhm,
provide presence and safety in an experience? I think for many women as well, it's really beautiful when we're, um, you know, I think what can happen with men is there can be an assumption that all women work the same. And it's like, oh,
mhm,
well, my ex liked it when I rubbed her pussy really hard. Why don't you like it? And I think something I would invite any man listening to this podcast is to, every time you're having sex with a different person, is drop everything you think you know about what people like, and you're
mhm,
essentially starting again. And yes, of course, there's some universal things that are going to be great, and maybe you're just an absolute pro at going down and you kind of know what to do. But like check in,
mm,
have those conversations. And I think leading those conversations can be really beautiful too. Like, what is it that you're desiring? How could I bring you the most pleasure? I don't know, you might not want to say that. Maybe that sounds a
mm.
little bit contra woo-woo, but
How can I bring in the most pleasure into this interaction?
how can
Please
I
tell
how
me.
can I ignite the most pleasure in your body? But like actually just like having conversations. And I feel like all of these things are, things that we can all do, but speaking specifically to men, I think not assuming. I think my other invitation is like, okay, maybe you think you're a bit of a pro in bed, but like maybe just drop the ego a little bit and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to have to relearn a new person's body. Don't be afraid to and don't be afraid to be vulnerable as well.
Mm.
Yeah, don't be afraid to open up a little bit.
And
Mm.
advice to women?
Advice to women. Oh goodness, where do I begin? I think my biggest thing, the biggest piece of advice would be learn your body, understand your body. For so many women, we've been taught that, masturbation and self-pleasure isn't something that we should do. And for many women, comparatively to men, where it was a more normalized topic, don't understand their body. So my invitation is like, learn your body, understand your turn on, understand what turns you on, so you can be in a position to really communicate that, because you can be, heterosexually speaking, you can be with a guy who is asking you all the right questions and who is there and who is open and who is present and who is willing and who is being like, hey, how can I
Mm.
pleasure you? But if you don't have the answers, if you're not familiar and confident and comfortable in your own body, which is very much a self journey, it can be really hard to show up in that. So
Mhm.
learn your body, build your confidence in your body, understand what brings you pleasure and turns you on, um, and learn how to communicate that.
Mhm. And how about for the benefit of men as well, or for the male partner in this instance, making the experience
Yeah.
better for the man?
Yeah, for sure. I think something that is really beautiful, that I know I've received from a lot of men that they really enjoy, is like bringing a devotional to sex and really like playing into masculine and feminine polarity. The feminine, if you are someone who holds a feminine pole, and I'm generalizing here, everyone's experience is going to be different. And like let's take what I say with a grain of salt, but leaning into, the beautiful feminine aspects that as women, if we are holding that feminine pole, can really bring, that are different to what men can bring. So if we're playing in that masculine and feminine dynamic, bringing forward those really beautiful feminine aspects, the opening, the bringing forward our erotic, our devotion, our archetypal range, and really sharing that and allowing, our feminine essences to be felt by men. It's incredibly nourishing and, um, oftentimes, yeah, really expansive for men to experience. I don't know if that made sense, if you know what I'm talking about when I say a feminine essence, but that's my answer.
Yeah, I completely agree in what you were saying there, in that the expression of arousal, of enjoyment, of pleasure, and I guess of participation, I think can go a long way into, yeah, making the guy, the man, feel comfortable
Mm.
and engaged and competent, which I think is not an insignificant thing amongst men. Is how competent they are, whether they're actually, whether what the pleasure that they're supposedly giving is being
Mm.
is authentic, is, and if they're good at sex at all. So yeah, I think I can agree in what you're saying, and that signaling that what is
Mm.
that the actions of the man are good, and that's something that you're participating in and that you're very much
Yeah,
enjoying, which is hopefully the
yeah.
case, and that you kind of
Yeah.
work on
And
together.
I think as well, like everything that I mentioned
Yeah.
for, what can men do to support women to have better sexual experiences are all things women can do to support men as well. I guess what I'm speaking to, when I'm talking about like
Mm.
really bringing forward the full range of our feminine essence, is really like, how can we bring forward all of the aspects that make us up as a woman and really share them with our men to nourish them, to
Hmm.
turn them on, to devote to them, to really kind of like, yeah, expand them and initiate them in the world of sex. So this can This can look like how we move, how we touch,
Mm-hmm.
how we speak, the tone of our voice. And all of this is, like you said, like it's underpinned by authenticity. This isn't about putting on some fake, like this is not about faking it and
Mm-hmm.
pretending that you're enjoying something and acting like an airy fairy. No, this is like really truly embodying like the fullness of who you are as a woman and bringing that to the table for to share with someone who you feel really deserves to feel that and experience that. And vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. Like when a man is
Mm-hmm.
embodying the
Mm-hmm.
full range of his masculinity and he's showing the
Yeah.
fuck up in the bedroom and is just like, oh, it's so hot. And it's just, it makes there's that polarity between
Mm.
between us that is really makes for a super sexy experience. And if you've someone who's experienced that, if you're someone who, like me, holds a feminine pole, and what I mean by that is you are in your feminine energy more than you are your masculine, and you're, having sex with someone who
Mm-hmm.
really holds that masculine pole, you've probably had that experience of like, oh, this fucking works. Oh, he's really bringing that, and I'm bringing this, and this is just like,
Yeah.
oh, the polarity is clicking. It's like two magnets coming together. So I think when we can both start to embody that and really create polarity in the bedroom, that's when things start to get fucking saucy, to put it scientifically.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're both fully participating, fully there, fully present. Well, there's a difference between fun and pleasure, right? Like you can kind of be having sex and it be pleasurable, but it being fun is a whole different thing. Like fun and exciting and
Yeah.
and all the things that you just said. Yeah. And so I think that if perhaps if there is a goal to aim at that is a worthy goal in that it's not just a goal with an
Yeah.
endpoint like orgasming, it's to make it fun, to make it any and every sexual
Mm,
experience fun. Um, and that potentially ties into another question that
mm,
I had for you, which I think is an important one. How do you avoid, or how do we avoid sex feeling sort
mm.
of routinized and
Yeah.
repetitive in a
Oh,
long-term
the old
relationship?
long-term relationship sex rut. This is uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable answer for many people because it requires us to actually take a good long hard look at ourselves. But essentially, like if you don't want sex to get stale in a long-term
Mm,
relationship, you're gonna have to try. You're gonna have to put effort in and you're gonna have to fucking and show up with curiosity and willingness and openness and exploration. And like you mentioned, play. There is, we have biologically things that happen in our body when we first meet people. We have like a limerence phase where we're just like, oh my God, this person is so amazing. And like, it's that really lusty first phase. Oh my God. And the sex with them is never going to go
yeah.
stale. Like it's just that good. And undoubtedly after 6, 12, 18 months, that limerence wears off, which is essentially like the lust of a new relationship. And it does, it wears off. It's a biological thing. Some people
Mm,
it wears off a lot. Yeah,
the
and for some
novelty.
people it wears off only a little bit. But no matter where you're at, when you are with people, if we're talking long term, 5+ years, if we're talking even 2+ years, um, really cultivating the spark in our relationships requires effort. And first and foremost, it actually requires us to take care of the spark within ourselves because a pattern that I notice so often is that people in long-term relationships will come to me and be like, oh, there's just no spark between us anymore. Like, I don't know, like we just don't have sex anymore, X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, do you feel erotically alive? Do you feel sexually alive in your own self? Do you have that cultivation within yourself? No, is usually the answer. Actually, is always the answer. So it's really
Hmm.
maintaining a sexual relationship with ourselves and maintaining our kind of sexual sovereignty as an individual in a relationship and then being able to bring that forward in our relationships. Because you think when you're single, right? we're both single right now. And it's like,
Mm.
we're thinking like we're individual, our
Hmm.
sexuality is very much our own thing, right? And it's really easy to bring that forward in sexual scenarios because we're not having to kind of like when we bring it forward, it's like it's ours, it's there, we're sovereign right now. And then you're in a relationship, say a monogamous relationship, and then you sort of start to share your sexuality and it all starts to like kind of merge. And we start to rely on outsourcing our turn on and our desire from another person, perhaps initiating, or just from another person, full stop. So the way to keep a spark alive in a long-term relationship is A, keep the spark alive in
Mm.
yourself. Do things that turn you on, cultivate pleasure and connection to your body in your own life, and bring that forward in your relationship. Prioritize play, curiosity, and exploration. Don't assume that you know everything that there is to know about your partner. Always maintain a level of curiosity um and I guess like almost mystery between you. Like don't let that spark is our eros is very much
Hmm.
like um maintained by that curiosity and exploration. Um, and again, don't avoid the hard
Hmm.
conversations. If you are feeling as though you're sexually disconnected or that spark is fading, but you still love this person with your whole heart and you know they're the one you want to be with, it's like reach out for help. There's this whole plethora and find a sex coach. But there
Find
is
a
this
sex
whole
coach.
world of resources and tools and intimacy and connection, or intimacy and connection tools that are literally designed to to support you in that. So, like, if you, I don't know, it's like if you were feeling, I don't know, if you had a I don't know what a good analogy here is, but it's funny when it comes to sex, people will brush it under the rug a lot. Whereas with other things, they're like, oh, that's something that's,
Hmm.
not doing so well. I need to work on that. It's like, oh, I'm not doing very well in uni. I'll get a tutor. It's like you can literally tutor yourself in sex as well, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Not my best analogy, but I think you know what I mean.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think there's a, obviously, sexual, from what you were just saying, sexual exploration, the reintroduction of things like novelty and mystery and curiosity, rediscovering your partner in some ways, and whilst still playing on the strengths or bonds you already have established,
Mm.
is an important thing, clearly.
Mm.
And like you just said, there's some perhaps some ways of doing that. Maybe creating new scenarios for yourself, novel scenarios, exploring new things, putting yourself in new situations, just
Mm.
talking about the fact of
Mm.
a long time having sex together. um, all that in mind, do you think there is a requisite or healthy amount of sex that people should be having in a long term
Mm.
relationship, like per week, per month? Or is that
Mm.
just a silly, irrelevant context, completely context dependent question? Like, not for the sake of the sexual dynamic, but for the relationship itself.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, so I think, this is an incredibly subjective thing. Everybody is going to have different needs, different
Hmm.
desires, different preferences, different boundaries. And there is no, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, there's no one size that fits all, right? So there is always going to be variations in what people are needing and how people are defining a, healthy sex life. I see people make blanket statements of like, oh, you should be having sex 3 times a week. And it's like, I really disagree with that. I think in order for it to be healthy, right? I think for some people, yeah, that feels really nourishing and sustaining in their sex life. But for other people, that feels like a whole lot of pressure and is awful, right? So I think it's really getting clear on what is actually going to serve
Hmm.
you, your partner, and your relationship. And I think that is going to be really different. And what that requires is a level of honesty. It requires a level of honesty from both people to be like, hey, I'm quite nourished and sustained with sex once a month. I feel really great with that. And then the other person's like, well, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually needing it more than that. And then there's a conversation that has to happen of like, well, unfortunately, that's your responsibility. You know, if one person is desiring sex more than the other, it is also our sexuality is our responsibility, right? We're not, this is not a process of forcing someone to have sex with us, you know, whenever we want. Like, I've gone a little bit off topic here. But
Mm-hmm.
what I'm trying to say is it's going to be different for everyone. There's no right or wrong or too much or too little. The most important
Mm-hmm.
thing is not how frequently you're having sex, but how nourished, how connected, how sustained, and how liberated and free feel during those sexual experiences. Because you might be, you know, yeah, okay, cool. You're having sex 3 times a
Mm-hmm.
week and you're checking that off the list, but the whole time you're literally just like looking at the clock on the wall, waiting for it to stop. You're having a crap time and it sucks. That doesn't sound like a particularly healthy or nourishing or sustainable sex life to me. Um, so it's really about
Mm-hmm.
being honest with what your needs are and coming to a place of, I guess, yeah, balance in your own relationship. I don't believe there's a right or wrong too much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well, you know, this
Negotiation.
is something I really want to reiterate is going to change over everyone's lives. You know, when the biggest, you know, the most common thing is when people have children, right? They go from having sex every night, like every night of the week with their partner to, okay, we've got a newborn baby. And that's not possible. So we're going to have to adjust. And we're both sleep deprived with 3 toddlers now. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's actually not sustainable. And also allowing ourselves the grace and the adaptability of, you know, things are inevitably going to change over the course of our lives and just being open to that and allowing ourselves to move with the different seasons of our lives and adapt as well. Mm.
Mm-hmm. 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 I think there's a lot of lessons there for sure,
Mm.
um, that we can all learn from. I just wanted to, before maybe going into the relationship side of things more deeply, ask to veer back to the casual sex thing for a second, though it has implications for the sort of relationship side of the discussion. And I'm curious on what your thoughts are on the nature of casual sex, not the way it's performed,
Mm.
so to speak, but just the act, the process,
Mm.
on sort of, I guess, on the general psychological well-being front, and then also on the front of relationships, like pertaining to relationships and connection, because I guess we're very much in a dating app landscape at the moment, which is to try and facilitate. The point is to try and facilitate connection, but it's also very much so, and I'd say potentially more so, even at least in its original conception, or maybe in the conception that's less sort of openly admitted to, is the
Mm.
quick fixes, right? Is the casual element,
Mm.
like a one night stand, that kind of thing, and that now that might be good for ourselves in terms of
Mm.
getting what we want, in terms of being
Mm.
satiated sexually without any
Mm.
commitment, without the effort that goes into that, and the trials to, as well as the passion and the
Mm.
positivity. And I've had this opinion for a while now, and one that I've observed and amongst other men as well, in particular. And I'm curious. I suspect it's not quite the same with women, because of just the differences now in the evolution of our psychology, particularly when it comes to our sexual psychology, is that casual sex has a very satiating effect in that it is like a goal completed, right?
Mm.
So when you might meet someone and you go on a date with them, and maybe your intention is to just have casual sex, maybe it's not. Maybe you're open to things. The process of having sex with someone early on, before you've really gotten to know them, let's say before the desire or the appreciation or the the enjoyment that is derived from that other person comes very much from their company and their personality, before that's
Mm.
properly established, and that is instead delivered in the form of a sexual encounter, I think that can have a really strong effect in eliminating interest
Mm.
beyond that encounter. For men in particular, it's what we were evolved to do in many ways, is to reproduce as in a way where we are
Mm.
tied down as little as possible, to reproduce as much as possible. And from that mechanism, not having a partner is a way to do that. Now, obviously, there's more to that
Mm.
story, and it's more complicated to that, but that is sort of an element of our reproductive psychology.
Mm.
And so, I guess what I'm getting at is that I think that has problems for then having
Mm.
relationships, and the long term sort of process. The process of dating is that by having sex early on, we've all been there. I've been there.
Oh my God, I've never
Um,
been there.
you're denying yourself. You're more.
No.
I wouldn't have thought so. you're you're more likely to deny yourself the opportunity to establish a connection with someone, or have that ensuing relationship founded more on the qualities of the connection with the person itself, because it can go both ways, right? And I'm starting to ramble on a little bit here, but just to finish this point, it can go both ways in that it can be both eliminating, satiating. Sex is like a goal that the mind constructs, and that once you've completed that, you've orgasmed. It's sort of like it's the what's the
Yeah.
post nut clarity, that kind of thing, right?
Women
It's
have
that
that too,
kind of
by the
same
way.
that same process of, because your desires, you're motivated, like you're in a motivated state all up until the
Mm.
point where your perceptions, your thoughts, your wants are very much focused on that thing, and then until that thing is completed, and then you sort of have this flush, this moment of, well, just think you're not so consumed by that anymore, that desire. Now it's
Mm.
not deterministic that's the case. On the other hand, sex can, because of the way it very often releases the or elicits both vasopressin and oxytocin within our brains, the
Mm.
former more for men and the latter more for women, which are our bonding hormones, our social bonding chemicals. It
Mm.
can then encourage a connection prior to the establishment of a real, let's say, a bond
Mm.
based on personality and context, which maybe I'll let you respond to the first bit before I get onto that second part, which I think
Mm.
maybe I mentioned briefly when we were
Mm.
chatting yesterday in preparation for this. But do you have any thoughts on that, in terms of the value versus the dangers of casual sex, particularly if you, in terms of what you want? I guess maybe what I'm trying to say to men in this instance, it's like, if you're interested in someone or you think you might like them, um, you you and a long term, like love is what you're interested in more so than that gratification, then generally speaking, and from the observed reports of many people around me, in terms of their feelings post a casual encounter, um, how motivated they are, how inclined they are to maybe to think of a
Mm.
person in a certain way, delaying that initial sexual encounter, at least it doesn't have to be weeks, I suppose, or months. It could be if you're really invested in it, but at least
Mm.
a few dates
Mm.
down the line, it's quite
Yeah,
important, I think.
so look, delaying sex, right? Like there's pros to this, in my opinion. I'm all for taking your time before jumping into bed with people. Number one, it builds tension, it builds anticipation, it builds connection,
Hmm.
intimacy, trust, and safety. These are all really great things that are amazing for life.
Desire, desire beyond the physicality, I would say. Sorry, just sorry to interject there, but just to add what you were saying, I think it really aids in building desire beyond the physical component.
100%. Well, and that was going to be my next point is that like it allows us an opportunity to really feel the other person. It allows us an opportunity to actually get to know the other person, to determine whether there's someone that we even want to be physical with. Because sometimes we can, particularly when we're dating, is like the first time we meet someone, we're like, oh my God, wow, they're so mysterious and sexy and great. And oh, I think I really like them. And then you go on a second date with them and you're like, oh, actually they're a Trump supporter and they've got all of these like really like they've got all of these like really differing values to me and I'm not about that. And actually that's a bit of a turnoff to me. And
Hmm.
you're able to kind of establish a better sense of the person before becoming physically intimate. And it also works the other way, like you said, allowing that time and space, it gives us space for the connection to grow, right? It gives us space to start to understand and feel and see someone beyond
Hmm.
just, like you said, that transactional kind of sex that's on the table. Um, what I will say here though is you're not going to pass up the love of your life. The love of your life rocks in on a Tinder date. You're going to feel it and you're not going to be like, oh, we had sex the first time. I'm not into it. You're going to feel that person and there's going to be something that happens and you can be like, I'm chasing that. And I know that sounds a little bit spiritual and woo-woo, but I truly believe
Hmm.
that we don't pass up on the loves of our lives, right? Or the big the soulmates or the big connections of our life. There's something deeply felt and deeply spiritual, in my opinion, and in my experience, that happens when you just can feel a connection and a bond with someone, and you're like, oh, I have to continue down this path. Like I have to follow this. Like, and that, in my experience and in my
Hmm.
um opinion is an undeniable thing that happens, and it doesn't matter what whether or not we have sex the first time we see them or not, we are going to feel that deep connection. And the people that are truly in alignment with us, we don't really have a choice. They're going to come in and we're going to be like, okay, cool, I have to go past that. So I just want to add that in there as well, which take with a grain of salt. That may not be for everyone, but
Mm.
that's how I feel and my experience. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for giving a little bit of time before diving into bed with people. I think there's a lot to be said for it. And also, I want to just empower people who are like, you know what? I'm not looking for anything serious. I'm not looking for a committed relationship. I'm not looking for that right now. And fuck it, I'm going to dive into bed on the first date, and that feels good for me. There's no right or wrong here. But I think it again, it comes back to, I guess, the intention within your dating life. Is your intention to find someone that you want to have a more serious relationship with? Is your intention to perhaps just be open to the unknown and allow that to kind of govern how you move?
Hmm.
And I think as well, there can be all of this kind of like, I'll just be real. Like there can be all of this kind of bullshit around like, don't give it up on the
Mm.
first date. He'll lose interest in you. And it's like, well, then he's not
Which is exactly what I
serious,
was just saying before.
which is what we were trying to say. Don't give it up on the first date. Otherwise, an absolute fucking weapon in bed. They'll be coming back for more over and over again. That's my personal opinion, not my professional advice. But but like if you're a but like that's what I would say to my girlfriend. I'm just like that's not anyway. But yeah, it's like I
Mhm.
think there's this whole idea around like saving ourselves and not, putting out on the first date in case he doesn't like me. It's like fuck no. It's like people who are meant for you will inevitably stay, and who will inevitably, you will see out a relationship with them in whatever form it's meant to be. So I think the most important thing here is do what's good for you, do what feels true,
Mhm.
do what feels authentic and aligned.
Mhm.
Don't contort yourself or um, yeah, be
Mhm.
inauthentic in the way you want to show up. Don't repress your desires, and in the same beat, take care of yourself out there.
As I was saying before the internet just cut out, although I agree with that and that sentiment that you expressed, I do think that well, potentially, maybe there's the proclivity for that to be true. I wonder maybe if that is slightly different for men and women in terms of what happens in the very early stages affecting the likelihood of a long-term connection, or the nature of that long-term connection. It might be the same for both of us, or it might not. They might not change at all. Although what I was going to say was I think that it's probably not helpful, at least, to have, if someone is, if you're very keen to and very interested in a person and you want the best chance at facilitating a healthy long-term relationship based just as much upon the connection and the spark between the two of you as people as it is on the sexual relationship, the sexual dynamic, then it may be worth considering delaying that engagement to a slightly later date. It doesn't have to be a whole lot later necessarily. It can just be a bit later. Like I think that I think the best relationships, some of the best relationships that I've seen are the ones where the people are already friends beforehand. It's not always the case, because it doesn't automatically mean that people are right for each other just by the fact that they've been friends before. But I do believe that at least some of the problem with dating now and the troubles that people run into is that they don't truly establish a connection built on friendship, like really on friendship, before the relationship is built on something like sex or sexual engagement, or the foundations were laid by that sexual engagement, not just the sex, the intimacy, the affection, the comfort, those just base human needs that we all want and we all desire, right? Is that, like, for example, maybe you find yourself 3 months, 6 months, a couple of weeks, a year into a situation with someone, and things aren't going well, or maybe they seem like they're going okay, or they're just okay, and that's a problem. And maybe you find yourself asking, do I genuinely enjoy spending time with this person one-on-one outside of a sexual encounter, or at least not adjacent to it? Like, am I perfectly willing or wanting to spend time with this person like I would one of my best friends? Like, is this person one of my best friends? Could we comfortably forego sex for days, weeks, whatever, and that be fine? That'd be fun, and I think, and this is where I think love comes into play, like proper love. I've sort of been playing around with this idea and this notion of love and its relationship to this idea of hope and the future as well. And like, I think that love is something that really transcends desire and affection, right? Like, those are things that you can very comfortably sit in a space with someone where you feel those things. You're perfectly happy to spend time with them. You enjoy spending time with them. You'd prefer to be with them than alone, and you might even, in any given moment, right? They make that moment better, and maybe you, because of what they're giving you, would like to spend that time with them more than someone else. But I think for where love comes into play, and where this ties into what I was just saying before about, like, really being friends, like really best friends, is when you envisage a future scenario, right? It can be any scenario, but let's say one that you're excited about. You would be excited about for you, right? Let's say maybe it's something adventurous. You're doing something, some kind of situation, or maybe you're not doing anything. You're just living. You're just there. You're just present.
Mm.
and you think of that person there with you, right, in that moment, sharing that experience with you and all the experiences before that and then the ones to come. And that makes you, the thought of that makes you like viscerally, like tangibly happy. Like that's something that you know is what you want, and yeah, and what you're happy with, and I'm not sure. Well, firstly, that's something that people consider or think about, and because I think it can be quite hard to determine for
Mm.
am I in love or not, and sometimes it's not hard at all.
Mm.
It's crystal clear, right? Um,
Mm.
but like that is a way of determining that, and part of that, of reaching that point, of being excited by the notion of your your future being constituted by time with that person, experiences shared, that is very much dependent on like a proper, or at least significantly aided by a proper friendship in
Mm.
that relationship, which is where I think maybe a lot of us go wrong, or we wonder why we're dating and things are falling apart or they're not turning into something. And then
Mm.
that comes back to my first point about the nature or the fact of sex being very present in the early stages of engagement with a person, and that sex automatically tends to instigate and encourage a kind of bonding between two people, just because of
Mm.
the intimate nature of it, but because of the way it affects our hormones, and
Yeah.
thus the associations that we build with another person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wonder, do you have any
What do
comments
I
on that?
say to
Have I
that?
contradicted any? Do you agree? I guess, do you agree with any of that, or have I
Yeah.
contradicted anything any of your beliefs said?
No, I think what highlight there is that enduring love is oftentimes characterized by friendship and a foundation of friendship. And if it is an enduring love that we are looking for, ensuring that the people that we're relating with have shared values, have shared interests, but not even shared interests, but just is someone that we love as not just a partner and companion, but as a friend, and that there is that friendship as a basis for that enduring love, right?
Hmm.
And I completely agree in that. I think where I stand on it is every relationship, every person is going to have different values, different needs, different, I guess, different requirements for a relationship and say an enduring love. Some people don't even desire that, right? So
Hmm.
and some people desire to be completely polyamorous their entire life and have fleeting relationships, and that actually really fulfills them and nourishes them. Some people desire, like, there's such a huge range of desires as humans. So yeah, I think if you are looking for that, traditional enduring love that is characterized by deep friendship, then, you know, being conscious of relationships that are characterized by lust and chemistry and sexual attraction, and um, whether that is the foundation and the basis of the relationship, or whether there is also friendship and shared values present too. Because lust and chemistry can be incredibly powerful, right? Like they can be these incredibly powerful, overpowering things. And like you said, the way I describe sex is there is always an emotional and an
Hmm.
energetic exchange occurring between people. And of course, there's hormones going off in our brain and bonding hormones, and there's all sorts of different things happening on different levels. And the other thing that sex does is it often triggers our attachment and our attachment wounds and our attachment styles. So if you're someone who tends to lean towards a more anxious attachment style, having casual sex with people is going to likely trigger the fuck out of an unhealed and anxious attachment style,
Hmm.
you know, and vice versa with avoidant as well.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Just
and
keep
then I
going.
think
That's okay. It's
yeah, keep
just
going.
we don't need it. It's fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think my invitation here is like get curious about what you want. If you are looking for relationships founded in friendship, then yeah, being cautious and conscious of the fact that sometimes when we dive into relationships with sex first, this can really muddy our perception of whether this person is someone we can actually see a future and a relationship and a friendship with, because it's clouded by lust and all of that, those kind of, even just like the attachment wounding that I was talking about and attachment styles, like it can be so clouded. So I guess just being conscious or conscious of how that's all impacting, yeah, your dating and the relationships you're sort of
Hmm.
experiencing while casually dating. Um, so I feel like that's kind of all I have to really say on that, is
Mm.
like 100%, yeah, like lust and sexual attraction and sexual chemistry can often override, um, it's like it's essentially, to put it simply, it's like when we ignore the red flags of like, but they're great in bed and we're ignoring the red flags, of like,
Hmm.
oh, we're actually not that compatible. Oh, we actually don't share that many values. Oh, they vote Labor, I vote Liberal. Or maybe that doesn't have a great track record. Maybe that's not going to
Hmm.
age well together. Maybe we don't actually share enough in common, to build a foundation moving forward. And I guess, and what I want to say to all of this again is just circling back to my kind of woo-woo view on all of it, is we are always going to be presented with people, and we are always exactly where we're supposed to be and having the experiences that we're supposed to be having. So you're don't if you're someone who's like, oh damn, I think that guy I went on a date with on from Tinder 3 years ago, I think he was my soulmate. Fuck, I shouldn't have had sex the first time we had a date. It's like, babe, no, he's not your soulmate. And that was another lesson in the many tapestry in the tapestry of life for you. So yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, well, I think that's all I have to say for the time being as well, Ruby. I know we've also gone a little bit over time too. So, is there, before we wrap up, is there anything anything else you'd like to say? Anything that we think that we missed or that is worth briefly touching up on any given topic that we've gone over?
Yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot today. I feel like we've, yeah, really covered a lot. But I guess, like, the only thing I will add, if you are someone who is, listening to this and needing any support, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I
Hmm.
only work with women. So if you are a woman who's needing some support and guidance in the realms of sex, love, relationships, intimacy, I offer one-on-one mentorship and group mentorship programs, which, yeah, you can find at my website or on Instagram.
And
Um,
what's your tag on Instagram? How can they find
yeah,
you?
so my tag on Instagram is ruby.josif.sex.coach. So you can find me there and yeah, reach out, let me
Mm.
know about the podcast, and yeah.
Yeah, great. I'll be sure to include the tag in any posts that I make.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, thank you so much, Ruby. That was very, very open and honest conversation, and I've very much enjoyed it. I'm sorry that we had all these tech difficulties throughout the way,
That's
which
okay.
viewers or listeners may or may not be aware of, depending on how well I edit this
How good you
afterwards.
are at editing.
I think right now I don't have a camera, so that'll be pretty apparent. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a pleasure. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to come on and to chat. And yeah, I didn't expect to say cock so many times. Hopefully everyone from high school isn't laughing too hard. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been so fun.
Cheers. Likewise.